Claudia, let's come to you first, because we understand that the Prime Minister will be announcing at 7 o'clock on Sunday at least a roadmap to how lockdown restrictions will be eased. What's your view on this? Do you think it's the right time to even be thinking about what the next steps forward are?
I think it's definitely the right time to be thinking about it, but I don't think it's the right time to be starting any form of lockdown at the moment. Our death rates are too high, and we're just not prepared for it. We haven't got a contact tracing system that works yet, that we know works. We don't have the viral testing capacity to ensure that it works. So I'm very concerned that we don't start too early. And the other concern is the mixed messaging. We've been getting a lot of different messages along the way. There's a lot of confusion, things change, guidance changes. And so we are concerned that the response will be inappropriate if there is too much detail, perhaps, or if it comes out too early.
Because I think, the issue is some people have been in lockdown now for 7 weeks, haven't they? They're sort of desperate for some sign that it's coming to the end. But you're worried then that by even suggesting what might happen next, people then get confused, because we've had this clear message, stay at home, people are able to understand that. But if that's watered down at all, you think people will then make their own rules up or slightly overstep the mark, and that could be a danger. What's your fear about what could happen?
Well, my fear is that the social distancing won't happen. As soon as there's any thought that we can start seeing our families again, the contact will increase. And it's understandable. Everybody wants to get out again. And there's an extraordinary amount of pressure now. You see the rest of Europe starting to ease out of their lockdowns. And so people are going to be getting impatient. The weather's getting nicer. They're getting frustrated. And frankly, some of the government messaging that's coming out, which seems to be changing and somewhat manipulated at times, the numbers are getting manipulated. I think there's a certain element of mistrust developing now. And so it's really important to have a very clear message and a very simple message that people can follow.
OK, let's talk to Susan Mickey about that. You're a behavioural psychologist, Susan, so you will understand the importance of giving the general public something, because I think, as Charlotte pointed out, we've been in lockdown for 7 weeks. Everybody is very sort of content to listen to the rules. I think the majority of the behaviour of the country has been sort of well observing those rules, but it's starting to sort of drag a little bit now. What do you think the Prime Minister needs to do on Sunday, which will re-steel everyone's behaviour in terms of keeping lockdown, but actually give them enough to believe that it's worth doing because lockdown is easing?
First of all, just say I'm speaking here in my independent capacity, and I 100% agree with the last speaker. All of these points are absolutely excellent. The infection rates do appear to be going up, despite the mixed messaging. Really important for everybody to understand that nothing's changed. The guidance is exactly as it was. It's been very unhelpful to have these trails, wherever they've come from, about what might or might not happen on Sunday. But it sounds like there may be some easing of guidance about spending more time outdoors. The evidence is that there's negligible transmission outdoors if people carry on having some social distancing. But that's very different than removing the stay-at-home message. And I think that's where some of the confusion comes in. Because if you say no longer stay at home, then the implication is we'll go out and about just as you were before. And that's absolutely, I'm sure, not going to be the case. So we need clear messaging, consistent messaging, but also explanation as to why any restrictions are being eased in the way they are.
But from your perspective, do you think it's time for us to have that information? Is it important that people get some of that? Or, like Claudia, are you nervous about the idea of even suggesting that lockdown could be eased, because that can confuse the message?
I think people do need information so they can understand what the guidance is about. And going forward, I hope that people will be given more information so they can work out for themselves what they might think is appropriate for them to do. So, for example, we've had a discussion over the last week or two about being over 70 rather than under 70. what seems to me a good idea is if we had a risk calculator. We've now got plenty of epidemiological evidence, so people could put in their age, their underlying conditions, where they live, what their occupation is, any other relevant factors, and find out how much at risk they are. And then they can decide how appropriate it is to go out and do the kind of things that we may be being urged to do. Because there are some people who are very anxious about going out, who've stayed at home this whole few weeks and not gone out at all. And obviously we need to reassure them, whilst at the same time ensuring that those people who are getting frustrated and bored, which are the data suggests young men, realise the importance of suppressing this pandemic, which means limiting contact between people and those old simple behaviours of the keeping your hands disinfected, surfaces disinfected, catching coughs and sneezes and tissues, and not touching eyes, nose and mouth, which is how the virus gets into the body.
Well, let's bring in Sir Peter Fahey at this point, because police are going to have the difficult job, aren't they, of, I mean, it's already been a difficult job policing the lockdown, enforcing these measures. If we see some easing of some of the restrictions, what challenge is that going to provide for police? Because, you know, if people, for example, are allowed to go out for more exercise, if they're allowed to sit on a park bench, but they still have to keep 2 metres apart, how much of an issue is this going to be for the police to manage all of this?
It's a huge issue, because we've got to remember that we can have a discussion on a television programme about this, but it is individual police officers who are on the front line of this messaging who are going to be challenged by people saying, why can't I sit in the park and do, or, you know, have sunbathing? Why can't I go and meet my mates? What's wrong with this? So that's why, again, you know, the rationale needs to be really, really clear. But I think we also need to, you know, the police, we cannot do this by law enforcement. The police in this country don't have the capacity to do this by enforcing the law, by issuing fixed penalty tickets or anything like this. It has to be about clear messaging, as the other contributors have said, that the public understand the rationale, who is most at risk, and why, if I'm doing this particular behaviour, does it put other people at risk? But as I say, you can't achieve this by enforcement of the law. We've gone beyond the situation they were in France or Italy. We were never really in that situation. We don't have that sort of relationship between the police and the public. And therefore, it has to be about the public understanding the science, understanding the rationale, and the police officers then can you know, when they do have to explain it, they've got that strength of argument behind them.
Peter, I wonder, when you've spoken to your former colleagues about the situation and how they're having to police it, what their reaction has been. Has it been difficult for them, or do they feel like, on the whole, the British public have been pretty compliant?
Well, it's never, you know, the vast majority are compliant, but it's always about, you know, that minority that are not compliant, often people that the police are dealing with all the time. You can understand sometimes the frustration of young people, but then there are other people deliberately disobeying, breaking the law, having house parties, gathering in places. And clearly there's been a huge increase in the number of people who are complaining about their neighbours, and the police having to deal with those sorts of calls. But the police would be wanting to concentrating on things like domestic abuse, domestic violence, people at risk, vulnerable people. You know, and as I say, if there is any confusion about this, and it is already fraying at the edges, the police are going to come under more pressure. And that's why, as I say, the messaging is so very crucial on this. We're seeing an increase in assaults on officers. You know, we are seeing the police under more and more pressure. So it is about how you gain, you know, maximum public support behind this. And it comes back to the messaging being clear, the rationale being clear. And exactly as others have said, this sort of trailing, this sort of long lead up to, you know, the key announcements does cause problems for the police if people think this gives them licence to do certain activities which actually are not allowed under the restrictions.